grade 12 learners, welcome to today's history lesson. My name is Dimpon Tlabati. This lesson is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Phakama Research and Development. Now, historians, we are still on topic 5 and the subtopic is TRC. Now, without any waste of time, learners, let us move to the objectives of the lesson. Now, this lesson, learners, is based on the second last bullet point of the examination guideline, which is on the responses of political parties to the TRC. Now, by the end of this lesson, learners, you should be able to discuss the responses of different political parties to the TRC. And lastly, you should also be able to discuss the final report of the TRC. Now, in grade 11 learners, you covered apartheid South Africa and the response to apartheid. And then in grade 12, under the negotiated settlement and the government of national unity, you spoke about the violence between different political parties pre-1994 elections. So now as we proceed, you will realize that this topic that we are focusing on today is actually linked to these two topics. One done in grade 11, which is apartheid and the response to apartheid or the resistance to apartheid. And one is also the negotiated settlement and the government of national unity, which you covered this year in grade 12. Now, learners, for the baseline assessment, I just want you to answer this one question that is actually linked to the previous lessons that we have been discussing or we have been dealing with from lesson 1 up until lesson 3. So now, in this case, I just want you to answer one simple question that says, who was expected to apply for amnesty? And then you can also use this cartoon to guide you on how to come up with the answer. So when you look at this cartoon, it says amnesty once only offer, and you can see there is a washing powder, and then we also have a shirt with stains, and then after it has been washed with this washing powder called amnesty, it no longer has stains. So now I want you to think about it. Who was expected to apply for amnesty? Who did the TRC actually ask to come forward and apply for amnesty? I just want you to take 1 minute and come up with your own answer. Then we will discuss possible answers after that. Now, learners, hope you had enough time to think of the answers. Now, let us look at possible answers for this question. Now, firstly, we know the obvious answer to this question is perpetrators of gross human rights violations who committed crimes 1960 to 1994. But here we are not excluding the leaders of the National Party as well. Remember, everything or all the crimes that were committed under their leadership. So they were also expected to go before the TRC and apply for amnesty. But it should not end there. Remember, learners, when we talk about gross human rights violations, remember what I said? I said you should not only think of the agents of apartheid, you should not only think of members of the National Party being the only ones who committed crimes during apartheid. We also have liberation movements or liberation groups or the oppressed, those who were fighting against apartheid, those who were resisting apartheid. They also committed crimes. Therefore, they were also expected to appear before the TRC and apply for amnesty so that the process of reconciliation can take place. So the other answer that you can give here is different liberation movements. So different liberation movements such as the ANC, such as the IFP, were also expected to appear before the TRC and apply for amnesty. Now, so under terminology, learners, today we only have one concept which is witch hunt. Why do we have one concept? It's because by now I'm 100% sure that you are familiar with most of the concepts that we will be talking about or discussing in this topic. You already know what we mean by perpetrators. I'm 100% sure that you know what we mean by victims, what we mean by amnesty. You know that amnesty is an official pardon granted to perpetrators who committed politically motivated crimes between 1960 and 1994 or during apartheid. So you are familiar with most of the concepts. Even this one you are familiar, but I feel that I should remind you of this one because we will be talking about this one in this topic as well. Now, witch hunt. It's an investigation to uncover people suspected of a crime, but often as a means of undermining those with opposing views. It is basically about actually investigating crimes that were committed by suspected people, but often these people are people with opposing views. So the main purpose of actually investigating them is to actually undermine them or actually to expose them. So that practice is known as a witch hunt, whereby you investigate someone in order to uncover the crimes that they committed. And in this case, the person that is being investigated is the one with opposing views. And the purpose of this investigation will be either to undermine or expose them. So that is known as a witch hunt. Now let us look at the response of the National Party towards the work of the TRC. Now what you need to know is that the National Party was not happy with the TRC. It was not satisfied with how the TRC actually worked. It was not happy with the work of the TRC. Now hence you see there it says it was not happy with the TRC. Now next bullet point, it says the NP felt that the TRC was biased against the National Party and claimed it as a what? As a witch hunt. So it saw the TRC as this commission that was trying to uncover the crimes that were committed by the National Party with the purpose of exposing or with the purpose of undermining them. Hence they called it a what? A witch hunt. Now if we look at this cartoon here, it's all about the response of the National Party towards the TRC. Now look at there, it's written the National Party. Now it says they are talking, the agents of the apartheid are actually talking, the members of the National Party are actually talking here. One of them is saying the Truth Commission is a witch hunt. Now if you look at in that back that is written the NP or the National Party, there are actually crimes that were committed by the National Party, and one of them is actually trying to hide them by pushing them inside the bag. So now I want you to understand this. The National Party was against the TRC, was not satisfied with the work of the TRC. They acted up actually regarding the TRC as a witch hunt. They actually felt that the TRC was against the National Party. It was investigating the crimes that were committed by the National Party with the purpose of undermining them, with the purpose of exposing them. So they actually felt that the TRC was not in their favor. Now, we know that under the National Party, we had P.W. Botha as the leader of the National Party, then F.W. de Klerk. Now, based on what we have discussed in the previous lesson, you already know that P.W. Botha refused to appear before the TRC. He actually was summoned, he was asked to appear before the TRC, but he refused. Now, F.W. de Klerk did appear before the TRC. Now here's a picture of F.W. de Klerk appearing before the TRC, and he's raising his hand promising to tell nothing but the truth. Now it says here F.W. de Klerk takes an oath before testifying to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Cape Town in 1997. So now you know, learners, that one of the leaders, which is P.W. Botha, refused to appear before the TRC, but F.W. de Klerk did appear before the TRC. Now, what did he say? Now, it says, F.W. de Klerk, the leader of the National Party, stated that the TRC was a wasteful process. So it means, again, he was actually against the process of the TRC. Why was he against it? Why is he saying that the TRC was a wasteful process? It says there, as it aimed to humiliate him. That is why they call the TRC a witch hunt. However, de Klerk appeared before the TRC. As you can see there, he is appearing before the TRC. And he made a formal apology for apartheid. He actually said, I'm sorry for apartheid, but there is a big but there. He insisted that he had never authorized or been aware of the excesses of the brutal actions of the security forces. Now he's apologizing for apartheid as a whole. He's apologizing for apartheid, but at the same time he's saying he was not aware of all the brutal actions of the security forces under the National Party. Now, as a leader, he's not taking full responsibility. He's not taking accountability. He's actually apologizing, but at the same time saying he was not aware of the brutal actions or the crimes or the atrocities that were committed by the security forces during apartheid. So therefore we can conclude to say, as much as he was apologizing, he did not take full responsibility or full accountability of the crimes or gross human rights violations of apartheid. So therefore, at this moment, we can ask ourselves to say, was this apology genuine? As much as he appeared before the TRC, as much as he apologized, was the apology genuine? Now, before we move on to the report of the TRC on the National Party, I just want us to actually remind ourselves of the following. Number one, I want you to take note that the National Party was not happy with the work of the TRC. They actually called or referred the TRC as a witch hunt, because they believe that the TRC was investigating the National Party, or was investigating the crimes that were committed by the National Party with the purpose of actually undermining them or exposing them. And then one other thing that I want you to remember is that de Klerk, the leader of the National Party, actually regarded the TRC process as a waste of time because it only aimed to humiliate him. And his reason again was that there are other leaders of different liberation movements who refused to appear before the TRC. So now he saw this as a way of the TRC to actually humiliate him, as there were other leaders as well who refused to appear before the TRC or to take accountability. However, he ended up appearing before the TRC and he apologized for apartheid. But at the same time, he said he was not aware of those crimes, of those brutal actions of the security forces, and he never authorized any brutal action or any gross human rights violations. So now, hence I'm saying to ask yourself, was the apology genuine? Now, what did the TRC discover? What was the TRC report on the National Party? What was the TRC's findings on the National Party? Remember, de Klerk said he was not aware. De Klerk said he actually did not authorize any brutal action of the security forces. So is it true? Is that what the TRC actually discovered? Now it says here, findings of the TRC. Now we are actually looking at the TRC report. What did the TRC actually find when they were investigating? Was the National Party actually guilty of the crimes that were committed during apartheid? Was the National Party actually guilty of gross human rights violations? Now it says there, findings on the National Party. Now, the TRC actually discovered that the National Party under P.W. Botha was responsible for murder, torture, arson, abduction, and sabotage. It does not end there. As the TRC was investigating, it actually found de Klerk's government responsible for activities of third force in attempt to disrupt pre-1994 elections. Now, this one you should have covered in the previous topic. Remember when we were doing the negotiated settlements and the government of national unity, where you were talking about the violence between different political parties before the 1994 elections. Now, learners, remember when de Klerk appeared before the TRC, he said he did not authorize or he was not aware of any brutal actions. But the TRC actually discovered that de Klerk's government was responsible for activities of third force in attempt to disrupt pre-1994 negotiations. Now, after he has discovered that, the TRC has actually found him guilty of third force activities. He later took legal actions to prevent the publication of a paragraph which held him responsible for the activities of the third force between 1990 and 1994. He actually tried to stop the TRC from implicating him. He actually tried to stop the TRC from publishing that paragraph that implicates him in the activities of the third force, knowing that the truth will now come out to say he was involved. So he was trying by all means, hence he took what? Legal actions. It says he took legal actions to prevent the publication of what? Not the whole document or not the whole report, learners, but that one paragraph that actually implicates him, that actually held him responsible for the activities of the third force. Remember, he said he was not aware of any brutal actions and he did not authorize. Yet the TRC actually discovered that he was actually responsible for what? For third force activities. Now, it says here the ANC was unhappy that the TRC did not distinguish between the actions of the apartheid government and the ones of the liberation movement. They actually argued that when it comes to their side, the crimes that they committed were actually justified because they were committed along the process of fighting for liberation, unlike with the National Party where their crimes were planned. So therefore, they actually wanted a special treatment. They did not want to apply for amnesty because they felt that their crimes were actually justified. They had reasons why they committed those crimes. In fact, they did not deliberately commit the crimes. They were not planned. They were actually committed during the process of fighting for freedom. It was only when Tutu threatened to resign that members of the ANC agreed to apply for amnesty for the crimes committed. Before that, they did not want to apply for amnesty because they felt that they are not supposed to apply for amnesty because their crimes were actually committed during the process of fighting for liberation. But the TRC actually argued that a crime is a crime. And if one committed a crime during apartheid, they had to come forward and apply for amnesty so that there can be reconciliation. Now, what did the TRC discover as they were investigating about the crimes that were committed by the ANC? What were the findings? It says, remember now here the TRC report is actually finding the ANC guilty of gross human rights violations. Now, what was the response of the ANC towards the report? It says the ANC took the TRC to court to prevent the publications of the findings against it, but the Cape High Court rejected the case. So this is similar to what de Klerk did. Remember, de Klerk took legal actions to actually prevent the TRC from publishing that paragraph that implicated him in the third force activities. Now again here we see the ANC actually taking the TRC to court to prevent the what? The publication of the findings, just like de Klerk, where he actually wanted to prevent the TRC from publishing the findings. Now, let us look at the response of the IFP, Inkatha Freedom Party. What was the response of Inkatha Freedom Party? It says here, the IFP again had major problems. So this is similar to the response of the ANC and the National Party. If you remember very well, the ANC was not happy, the National Party was not happy. Now it says here, the IFP had major problems working with the TRC. What reasons did they give? It believed that TRC was biased against the IFP. It believed that the TRC was actually against the IFP and in favor of the ANC. It accused the TRC of uneven treatment. It basically means that, that they believe that the TRC did not actually treat them equally. Hence, they are saying it was biased against the IFP. The IFP wanted the ANC to apologize for the violence in Natal in the lead up to the 1994 national elections. Like I have indicated, remember in the previous topic we spoke about violence between different political parties, where now people ended up dying, where violence was used, human rights were violated. Now in that case, the IFP wanted the ANC to apologize for the violence. Now, the submission of the TRC report. Remember, the TRC was actually established by Nelson Mandela together with the government of national unity. Now, after concluding everything, they had to submit the report to who? To Nelson Mandela. Now it says the TRC actually submitted its report or presented the report to President Nelson Mandela in 1998. Now remember, we spoke about the responses of different political parties and the findings of the TRC regarding the activities of those political parties. Now after the findings, after compiling the report, they had to submit it to President Nelson Mandela. So it was done in 1998. Now, Mandela stated his belief that the report actually laid a foundation for reconciliation, but other key figures disagreed. There are other leaders who disagreed. Now, when Mandela received the report, which included the findings of the TRC, he actually indicated that the report has actually laid a foundation for reconciliation. Remember, the main aim of the TRC was to make sure that reconciliation takes place. So Mandela was actually saying this report will actually start the process of reconciliation. It has actually laid a foundation for reconciliation. Now, there are other figures who actually disagreed with what he was saying. This is including Thabo Mbeki, who represented the ANC in the TRC. Thabo Mbeki actually insisted that it was wrong to judge the violence used by the liberation struggle to fight against apartheid in the same way as the violence used by the agents of apartheid. It's basically what we spoke about, to say the ANC actually believed that the TRC could not differentiate between crimes that were committed by the apartheid government. Remember, the TRC actually insisted that it was wrong to judge the violence used by the liberation struggle to fight against apartheid in the same way as the violence used by the agents of apartheid. It's basically what we said, to say the ANC actually argued that the TRC could not differentiate between crimes that were committed by the apartheid government and the ones that were committed by the liberation movement. So remember, the TRC actually said a crime is a crime. It doesn't matter whether it was planned or not. So therefore, Thabo Mbeki actually argued that it was wrong to actually say all the crimes are the same. They actually wanted the TRC to differentiate or to distinguish between the crimes that were committed by the apartheid government and the ones that were committed by the liberation movement. Now, FW de Klerk accused the TRC of seeking for revenge rather than reconciliation. Remember, based on the findings of the TRC, political parties were actually found guilty of gross human rights violations, and those findings were actually published in the TRC report. Now, F.W. de Klerk is saying the TRC is actually, by publishing those findings in the report, it was actually seeking for revenge rather than reconciliation. Now, here is Desmond Tutu here. Remember, the TRC report was presented or submitted to President Nelson Mandela in 1998. Now, here is a picture of Desmond Tutu actually submitting the TRC report to Nelson Mandela. This is Desmond Tutu, and then this is your TRC report, and it is being submitted to President Nelson Mandela. Now, it says here, based on the responses from the political parties, it is clear that none of the political parties were willing to, or rather none of the political parties was willing to actually take accountability and responsibility for committing crimes or for gross human rights violations. So none of them were willing to say we are guilty and we will actually apply for amnesty. So none of the political parties, from the National Party up until the IFP, they were all unhappy with the process of the TRC. They actually criticized the TRC. Now remember, the NP actually said the TRC is a witch hunt. The TRC is actually against the National Party. When you go to the ANC again, the ANC is saying it is wrong for the TRC to be unable to differentiate between crimes that were committed by the apartheid government and the ones that were committed by the liberation movements, since the TRC indicated that a crime is a crime, and if one committed a crime, they should appear before the TRC and apply for amnesty. And again with the IFP, the IFP was also not happy. So it means none of the political parties was actually willing to take full responsibility. Now, at the same time, looking at the criticism of the National Party, the ANC and the IFP about the TRC, it is an indication that the TRC tried very hard to be even-handed or to be fair, because it only published the truth. Even about the ANC was also found guilty of gross human rights violations. So therefore, this is an indication that the TRC tried very hard to be even-handed, fair in its findings on gross human rights violations. Now, I think I have explained here in the picture to say it is Desmond Tutu presenting the TRC report to Nelson Mandela. Now, today we have a very short activity, learners. It is all about the response of different political parties to the TRC report. Now it says the cartoon below, this is source 2A, it's a cartoon. The cartoon below was drawn by J. Shapiro Zapiro for the Sowetan newspaper. What does it depict or show? It depicts Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Here is Archbishop Desmond Tutu delivering the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report to President Nelson Mandela on 29 October 1998. Remember, I said to you that the TRC report was submitted or presented to Nelson Mandela in 1998. Now, if you look at Desmond Tutu here, he's being attacked. There are arrows there from the ANC. There's an arrow from the FF, from the NP as well. So now the PAC, the IFP as well. What is Desmond Tutu carrying? It says truth. He's carrying the truth about gross human rights violations that were committed by different political parties. That is including the ANC as well, including the PAC as well. Now, it says here, special delivery. Now, here on the door, it's written Sheriff Mandela. So now it means he's running towards the door that is written Sheriff Mandela to deliver this special delivery, which is the truth. And what is Desmond Tutu saying? Attacked from left, right, and center, say, but we made it. So which basically means that they were attacked, but at the end of the day, they managed to discover the what? The truth. Hence, he says, we made it. And they managed to take the truth. They managed rather to take the truth to Nelson Mandela. Now, as we have analyzed this cartoon, I want you to answer these questions. There's 3 questions, learners. This is the only activity for the day. Number 1, 2.2.1, identify any 4. Now, it says any. So it basically means that even if there are many, you only identify any 4 political parties in the cartoon that attacked Tutu when he delivered the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report to President Nelson Mandela on 29 October 1998. Mark allocation 4 times 1. It means 4 answers, 1 mark each. Next question, explain the message conveyed in the cartoon regarding the final TRC report submitted to President Nelson Mandela on 29 October 1998. Mark allocation 2 times 2. Comment on the limitations of this source for a historian researching the submission of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Mark allocation 2 times 2. Now, learners, I'm only going to give you 10 minutes to answer these 3 questions. Remember to adhere to the mark allocation. Welcome back, learners. Hope we had enough time to answer the questions. Now let us go through the answers. 2.1.1, identify any 4 political parties in the cartoon that attacked Tutu when he delivered the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to President Nelson Mandela on 29 October 1998. Now learners, if you go back to the cartoon, there are many political parties, but here you are only expected to give only 4. Those are the political parties. Those are the political parties. So now let's go through the answers. We have the National Party. We have the African National Congress, which is the ANC. We have the AFF, which is the Freedom Front. We have the IFP, which is Inkatha Freedom Party, and we have the PAC there. So those are the 5 answers that you can give, or those are the 5 possible answers. So now, but the mark allocation only says 4. So learners, we have 5 answers. So out of those 5, you are only expected to give only 4. Now let's move on to the next question. Explain the messages conveyed in this cartoon regarding the final TRC report submitted to President Mandela on 29 October 1998. What is the message? When you analyze this cartoon, what messages are you getting? What is the cartoon telling you about the submission of the TRC report? Firstly, remember there were arrows from different political parties, which is an indication that the political parties actually attacked Desmond Tutu and the TRC. So the first answer is, or the message that is conveyed by the cartoon is that many political parties, including the ANC, the IFP, attacked the TRC report because they were implicated. Based on what we discussed, remember they even went to an extent of taking legal actions to prevent the TRC report from implicating them. So now it says here many political parties attacked the TRC report. The other message is that Tutu, as the chairperson of the TRC, submitted the TRC report to the office of Nelson Mandela despite all the challenges. So despite being attacked left, right, and center, he finally submitted the report. Lastly, Tutu regarded the submission of the TRC report as something special. Why do we say he regarded it as something special? Remember that back there was written truth, and then underneath it was written special delivery. So that is why we say the message, or another message, is that Tutu regarded the submission of the TRC as something special. Now, last question. Comment on the limitation. Remember, limitation is from the word limit, which means not to reveal everything. So what is it that is being left out? What is missing from this cartoon? And when we look at the limitation, we'll start looking from the origin of the source up until the message or the details of the source. So sometimes a source can have some limitations because the author is not indicated, but in this, or the cartoonist is not indicated. But in this case, the cartoonist is indicated as being Zapiro. So in that case, we cannot give that as our answer for limitations. The answer that we can give here as the answer for limitation is that it is only a view of Zapiro. So now this cartoon is actually showing us only the perspective of Zapiro regarding the submission of the TRC report. It doesn't show us about the views of other parties that were involved. It is, remember, a cartoonist can draw what they want you to see. They can draw a cartoon from their own perspective. So in this case, we only see the view of Zapiro, which is the cartoonist in this case, about the submission of the TRC report. The cartoonist portrayed a negative perspective, not a positive. So it doesn't show both. It only shows a negative perspective of the TRC report being attacked by various political parties. And lastly, the language used, which is attacked from left, right, and center, serves as a what? It serves as an admission of negativity on the TRC report. So I'm sure you can see that it's all about negative, nothing positive. So therefore, it means this cartoon only shows the negative perspective. It only shows one person's view on the TRC report, or on the submission of the TRC report. It does not include or show other people's views. So in this case, it means this source has some limitations. Now, it's time to reflect on what we have discussed. We have discussed the responses of different political parties on the work of the TRC. We have realized that the ANC criticized the TRC, the NP also criticized the TRC, and the IFP also criticized the TRC. So they all have one thing in common, which is them being against the work of the TRC, even though their reasons are not the same. The ANC criticized the TRC for failing to differentiate between the crimes that are committed or were committed by the apartheid government and the ones that were committed by the liberation movement. And the NP accused the TRC of being biased against the National Party. It even called the TRC a witch hunt. And lastly, the IFP accused the TRC of uneven treatment. So in this case, I'm sure from this lesson you learned that political parties were actually against the work of the TRC, and they had different reasons why they were against. So all in all, we can say these political parties that we discussed here, they were actually against the TRC. And they actually the ANC and the National Party, or de Klerk under the National Party, tried to stop the TRC from publishing the paragraph or the findings that were actually implicating them. And then it says here the TRC found the NP and the liberation groups guilty of human rights violations. So all these political parties that are discussed here were actually found guilty of gross human rights violations. Hence, they were expected to appear before the TRC and apply for amnesty. Now, we also learned that the commission or the TRC presented its report to Nelson Mandela in 1998. Now, learners, we have reached the end of today's lesson. And then let us look at what we are going to discuss in the next lesson. So in the next lesson, it will still be based on the TRC, but this time we will be looking at various case studies of victims and perpetrators. So this is the last bullet of the examination guideline. So in that bullet, we are expected to focus on case studies on victims and perpetrators. And this will be done in the next lesson. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.